Listen here. In the belly of Maryland's tobacco fields, under a blood moon in the year of our Lord 1820, there was born a woman they tried to break with 90 nights of iron chains. 90 nights, I tell you. In a darkness so deep even the rats trembled. Her name was Harriet, and before them chains ever touched her flesh, she carried the gift of sight. Could see beyond the veil where the haints walk and the ancestors whisper paths to freedom. They locked her in shackles so heavy she couldn't stand nor lie flat. The overseer, devil named Silas Crow, swore he'd crush her spirit like dried tobacco leaves. But what he didn't know, what none of them white devils knew, was that Harriet's soul been forged in African fire, tempered in Middle Passage waters, and blessed by root doctors who knew the old ways. In them 90 nights of torment, she sang low spirituals that made the earth tremble. And when that final night came, "O Lord have mercy," she turned them chains into weapons of righteous fury and drowned that overseer in the very water that collected in her cell, baptized him in retribution, sent his wicked soul straight down to hell's darkest corner. This ain't no fairy tale from some white man's book. This here's the memory of our people, passed down through generations like sacred fire. This is the story of Harriet of the Chains, the woman who became Moses, who led hundreds to freedom on the Underground Railroad, whose legend still echoes in every cotton field, every auction block, every place where our ancestors' blood soaked the ground. So settle your hearts and open your ears, 'cause what I'm about to tell you carries the weight of suffering, the power of resistance, and the glory of survival. Now you see, people, Harriet weren't born to chains. No child is. She came screaming into this cruel world on an October night when the moon ran red as slaughterhouse blood, when the wind carried whispers from across the great salt water where her grandmamas once danced free under African stars. Her mama, Old Rit, held that baby close to her chest, feeling the rapid heartbeat like African drums. And she named her Harriet after the woman in the good book who led folks out of bondage. Maybe this name be a shield, Old Rit prayed low, tears mixing with sweat on her dark skin. Maybe the Lord gonna spare this one from the worst of it. But ain't no name strong enough to ward off the devil of slavery, child. No prayer deep enough to stop what was coming. Harriet growed up on Master Brodess's plantation in Dorchester County, where the Choptank River snaked through marshland thick with cattails and secrets. The quarters, them rough cabins with gaps in the walls wide enough to let winter's cruel fingers inside, that's where she learned the hard lessons of bondage. By the time she was 5 summers old, she already knew the taste of ash cake and salt pork, the sting of bare feet on frozen ground, the sound of her mama's muffled sobbing when another child got sold away like cattle at market. The little ones would huddle together in the dark of the cabin, and Old Rit would tell stories in whispers. Stories about Anansi the spider, about flying Africans who escaped slavery by taking to the sky, about the old country where their people walked proud and free. "Remember who you is," she'd say, her voice thick with ancestral knowing. "Them chains on your body don't touch your soul unless you let 'em." Harriet listened with eyes wide as saucers, drinking in every word like spring water. But she had something else growing inside her, something the old folks recognized and feared. Visions, dreams that weren't dreams. She'd wake up screaming about things that hadn't happened yet, about overseers' whips falling before they fell, about sales before the trader's wagon arrived. One night she sat bolt upright and declared, "The master's horse gonna throw him tomorrow and break his leg." Next day it happened just like she said. "That child got the sight," old Aunt Sarah whispered to Rit. "The ancestors speaking through her. That's a powerful gift, and a dangerous burden in these times." By the time Harriet turned 7, she was already hired out to different masters, cruel folk who worked her like a mule and fed her less than their hounds. She cleaned houses, checked muskrat traps in icy waters that numbed her bones, rocked white babies while her own kin suffered. One mistress whipped her so bad her back looked like plowed fields, scars running deep as furrows. But Harriet never cried out, not once. She learned early to swallow pain like bitter medicine, to keep her face stone hard while her insides screamed. "Strong-willed woman," the field hands muttered with pride. That girl got iron in her blood. When she turned 13, something happened that changed everything. She was at the dry goods store when an enslaved man tried to run. The overseer, mean devil named Barrett, grabbed a 2-pound weight to throw at the fugitive. Harriet, without thinking, stepped between them. The weight struck her in the forehead, cracked her skull like an eggshell, sent her crashing to the floor in a pool of blood. They thought she'd die. For weeks she drifted between this world and the next, walking in a gray place where the ancestors gathered like storm clouds. She heard their voices, grandmamas speaking in languages the Middle Passage tried to drown, grandfathers chanting work songs from fields they'd never escaped. "You got work to do, child," they told her. "Heavy work, but we gonna be with you every step." When Harriet finally woke, something had shifted in her. The visions came stronger now, clearer. She'd fall into trances in the middle of work. One moment hoeing cotton, the next moment seeing paths through forests, hearing voices telling her, "Follow the North Star, follow the drinking gourd." The white folk thought the blow made her simple-minded. They didn't understand she was being prepared, baptized in blood and vision for the mission ahead. At 19, Harriet married John Tubman, a free black man with a laugh like summer thunder and hands that knew how to gentle horses. Lord, how she loved that man. His freedom was like sunlight after endless night, and she dreamed they'd have a life together, maybe buy her freedom somehow, raise babies who'd never know chains. But in 1849, when Harriet was near 30 years old, word came down like Judgment Day. Master Brodess had died, and his widow was selling off slaves to settle debts. The auction block's shadow fell across the quarters like a funeral shroud. "They gonna break up families," old Rit wept. "Sold down the river to the deep south where cotton fields stretched to hell and back." Harriet went to John, heart pounding like a runaway's feet. "We got to go north," she said. "I've been seeing it in my visions, a path through the woods, safe houses with candles in windows, the freedom line across into Pennsylvania." But John just shook his head, fear making him cruel. "You talk crazy since that weight hit your head. Ain't no successful escaping. They catch you, they kill you, or worse, sell you so far south you never see daylight again." "I ain't staying to be sold," Harriet declared, her voice carrying the steel of ancestors. "I gonna be free or die trying." "Then you go alone," John said, turning his back. "I ain't risking my freedom for your fool visions." That rejection cut deeper than any whip, hurt worse than the scar on her skull. But Harriet had learned long ago that survival meant moving forward, even when your heart was breaking. The night before the traders were set to arrive, Harriet stood in the doorway of the quarters, looking at the faces she'd known all her life. Her brothers Ben and Henry, her sisters, the aunties who'd raised her, the children playing in the dirt who'd never know anything but bondage unless someone showed them another way. She began to sing soft and low, a spiritual that carried code words the white folk couldn't understand. "When that old chariot comes, I'm gonna leave you. I'm bound for the promised land, friends. I'm gonna leave you." The old ones understood. They knew that song meant goodbye, but they also knew it meant something more. It meant she was about to do what they'd all dreamed of, what some had died attempting. She was gonna reach for freedom, consequences be damned. 3 days later, under a new moon sky black as tar, Harriet slipped into the woods, following the North Star like her visions had showed her. She left behind the only home she'd ever known, the people she loved, the man who wouldn't follow. But she didn't leave alone. The ancestors walked with her, whispering directions in her sleeping mind. The Underground Railroad conductors, righteous folk both black and white who risked everything, guided her through 90 miles of terror and hope. Every snap of a twig sounded like paddy rollers on her trail. Every dog's howl promised recapture and punishment. Yet she made it, crossed that freedom line into Pennsylvania, stood on northern soil, and looked at her hands in wonder. "I was free," she'd tell folks later, "but there was no one to welcome me to freedom. I was a stranger in a strange land. And my home, after all, was down in Maryland, because my father, my mother, my brothers, my sisters and friends were there. But I was free, and they should be free." That's when the real work began. That's when Harriet made her vow, a promise that would define the rest of her days and transform her into the legend called Moses. She would go back, again and again. She'd become a conductor on the Underground Railroad, leading her people out of bondage just like her namesake in the Bible. She'd make 19 trips into slave territory, rescue over 300 souls, never lose a single passenger. But before all that glory, before the legend was born, there came darkness, there came chains, there came 90 nights of torment that would have broken any lesser spirit. There came Silas Crow, and there came the reckoning. Harriet returned to Maryland on an autumn night in 1850, moving through darkness like a ghost with purpose. She'd come back for her family, starting with her niece Keziah and Keziah's 2 babies. The rescue went smooth as conjure work, but word spread fast through the slave-holding counties. There was a woman conductor operating bold as brass, stealing property right out from under masters' noses. The plantation owners raged like devils denied their due. They doubled patrols, set bounties, trained bloodhounds to track human scent through swamps and forests. But Harriet kept coming, kept liberating her people, moving like wind through tobacco fields and pine forests, always one step ahead of capture. It was on her 3rd trip back, this time aiming to fetch her husband John, still fool enough to hope he'd changed his mind, that Harriet's path crossed with pure evil, wearing human skin. Master Elias Thorne's plantation sat like a white-columned curse on a hill overlooking the Choptank River. 200 souls labored there, in cotton fields that stretched to the horizon, in rice paddies where mosquitoes swarmed thick as sin, in the big house where enslaved women served food they'd never taste. Thorne was a man who measured wealth in human flesh and calculated profit in human suffering. But the true devil of that plantation wasn't the master. It was his overseer. Silas Crow stood 6 feet of whipcord muscle and concentrated malice. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, gift from a slave who'd fought back years ago, a man Silas had beaten to death slow and public as a warning. His eyes were pale as February ice and just as cold, holding no more compassion than a snake studying a mouse. He wore a bullwhip coiled at his belt like a serpent waiting to strike, and he used it with an artist's precision. Knew exactly how many lashes to give before a body broke, how much pain a soul could endure before giving up its will to live. "I can break any nigger ever born," he'd boast to other overseers over whiskey and cards. "Man, woman, child, don't matter. Give me a week and they'll be docile as whip dogs." The enslaved folk of Thorne's plantation moved through their days with eyes cast down, speaking in whispers, jumping at shadows. They'd seen what Silas did to rebels, the burnings, the brandings, the slow deaths by whipping post. They'd heard the screams from the punishment shed, seen bodies carried out more dead than alive. But fear breeds resistance like pressure breeds diamonds. In the quarters at night, after the drivers had made their rounds and the white folks slept sound, the enslaved would gather in whispered circles. They'd sing spirituals that carried double meanings. Steal away to Jesus meant someone was planning escape. Wade in the water meant use the river to throw off the dogs. And they'd talk about her, the woman called Moses who'd escaped north and kept coming back, who moved through the night like avenging justice, who had visions that showed her safe paths and danger ahead. "Moses is coming," they'd whisper with hope glowing like coals in their eyes. "She gonna deliver us from this Egypt." Harriet arrived at the edge of Thorne's plantation on a moonless September night in 1851. She'd come for a family, mother, father, 3 children, who'd gotten word through the underground grapevine that Moses would guide them north. She hid in the pine forest bordering the cotton fields, waiting for the signal, a particular spiritual sung at dusk, indicating the family was ready. That's when Silas Crow first laid eyes on her. He was making rounds at twilight, checking that the field hands had finished their quotas, when he spotted movement at the forest's edge. Quick as lightning, he spurred his horse forward, bullwhip already uncoiling in his hand. But Harriet had the sight. She'd seen him coming in her mind seconds before he appeared. She melted into the trees like smoke, leaving only bent grass to mark her passage. Silas pulled up short, ice eyes scanning the darkening woods. "Who's there?" he called out, voice sharp as broken glass. "Show yourself or I'll set the dogs loose." Silence answered him. But he knew, felt it in his bones like approaching storm. Someone was out there. Someone who didn't belong. The next night, Harriet came closer, moving through the cotton fields under cover of darkness, heading toward the quarters. The family she'd come for was waiting, ready to risk everything for freedom's promise. But Silas had set a trap. He'd noticed the fidgety nervousness of the man, a field hand named Moses, ironic name that, and his woman Sarah. Noticed how they kept glancing toward the forest, how they'd sing louder than usual at the day's end. "Somebody's coming for them," Silas told Master Thorne. "I can smell it like I smell a storm coming. Let me stake them out, use them as bait." But Harriet had the sight for a reason. In her vision dreams, she saw the trap, saw Silas hiding in the shadows with rifle and rope, saw paddy rollers positioned around the quarters like wolves around a fold. So she changed plans, moved like water finding new paths, waited for a better moment. 3 days later, opportunity came. A white abolition sympathizer in town, Quaker man who kept a station on the Underground Railroad, got word to the family. They'd have to wait, but Moses would return when the time was right. Silas knew he'd been outsmarted, and rage burned in him like hellfire. He took out his frustration on the field hands, doubling work quotas, wielding his whip for the smallest infractions. The quarters ran red with blood that week, and the wailing of the punished carried across the plantation like the cries of the damned. But one woman wouldn't bow her head, wouldn't cast her eyes down when Silas passed, wouldn't shuffle and scrape like he demanded. Her name was Harriet too, Harriet Ross, no relation to the conductor, but cut from the same strong cloth. She'd been at Thorne's plantation for 5 years, surviving through quiet resistance and an iron will that no amount of punishment could bend. She was 32 years old, tall and strong-backed, with skin like polished walnut and eyes that burned with banked fury. The other enslaved folk whispered she had root knowledge, knew herbs and conjure, could work spells of protection and retribution. That woman got the ancestors speaking through her, old Aunt Ruth would say. She carries African power in her blood. Silas noticed her during a routine inspection of the cotton picking. While every other enslaved person kept their gaze fixed on the ground, Harriet Ross looked up, looked straight at him with something burning in her eyes that wasn't fear. It was defiance. Pure, undiluted, dangerous defiance. "You got a problem, girl?" Silas asked, his voice soft and deadly as a cottonmouth sliding through swamp water. "No, sir," Harriet said, but her tone carried an edge that made it sound almost like mockery. Silas felt heat rise in his face. How dare this chattel, this property, look at him like that, like she was measuring him for a grave? He circled her slowly on his horse, bullwhip tapping against his thigh in rhythm like a snake's warning rattle. "You pick your quota today?" "Yes, sir. 300 pounds. Let me see your hands." Harriet held them out, palms up, fingers spread. They were calloused and scarred from years of labor, blood crusted under the nails from cotton bowls' sharp edges. But they were steady, didn't shake one bit. "You know what happens to uppity niggers on this plantation?" Silas asked, leaning down from his saddle so his face was inches from hers. "I imagine you about to tell me, sir," Harriet replied, meeting his ice eyes with her own fire. The other field hands froze, horror-struck. Nobody talked back to Silas Crow, not if they wanted to keep breathing. But before Silas could respond, before he could unleash the violence coiling in his muscles like a rattler ready to strike, the bell rang from the big house. Master Thorne was calling for him, probably some matter of business or another escaped slave to track. "This ain't over," Silas promised, his voice low and poisonous. "You and me gonna have a reckoning real soon." "I'll be right here," Harriet said quietly. "Ain't got nowhere else to go." That night in the quarters, the other enslaved folk gathered around Harriet like worried kin. "Girl, you done lost your mind?" Moses the field hand asked, fear making his voice shake. "You know what he do to folk who cross him?" "I know," Harriet said calmly, crushing herbs with a stone, yarrow for bleeding, golden seal for infection, herbs she kept hidden for when Silas's whip fell. Been knowing it since the day I arrived here. But I ain't bowing down to no devil. My grandmama was a queen in the old country. She didn't bow, and neither will I." Old Aunt Ruth touched Harriet's shoulder, her ancient eyes filled with knowledge and sorrow. "Child, pride is a luxury enslaved folk can't afford. You keep your head high, they gonna strike it clean off." "Then let 'em strike," Harriet replied, her voice steady as stone. "I'd rather die standing than live on my knees." But she wasn't suicidal, far from it. That night, while others slept fitfully on their corn shuck mattresses, Harriet worked root work and conjure. She took gopher dust, graveyard dirt mixed with sulfur and salt, and sprinkled it at her doorway, speaking words in the Gula tongue her grandmother had taught her. She tied a mojo bag filled with High John the Conqueror root, devil's shoestring, and a piece of silver dime, wearing it hidden against her heart. "Ancestors," she whispered in the darkness, "if you hear me across the great water, if you still watch over your chillin' in bondage, give me strength for what's coming. Let my spirit be hard as iron. Let my will be strong as the ocean that carried us here. And if I fall, let my death mean something." The Haints gathered in the shadows, listening. The spirits of the drowned, those who jumped from slave ships rather than live in chains, pressed close. They knew. They understood. This woman carried their fire, their refusal to be broken. Over the next weeks, Silas found excuses to interact with Harriet Ross. He'd inspect her work closely, finding fault where there was none. He'd make her carry extra loads, assign her to the worst tasks, cleaning the stables in summer heat, hauling water in the freezing pre-dawn hours. He was testing her, trying to find the breaking point. But Harriet wouldn't break. She did every task with the same steady determination, never complaining, never showing weakness. And worst of all, worst for Silas's pride, she kept looking him in the eye whenever he addressed her. The other overseers noticed, started making comments. "Silas, you losing your touch? Can't even break one uppity wench?" Shame burned in him, mixing with an attraction he hated himself for feeling. Because Harriet Ross was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with delicate features or soft skin. She was beautiful like a thunderstorm is beautiful, powerful, dangerous, magnificent. And Silas Crow, for all his cruelty, felt something twisted inside him that he recognized as desire, which made him hate her even more. It came to a head one October afternoon in the barn. Harriet was storing harvested tobacco when Silas entered, closing the door behind him. The barn suddenly felt smaller, the air thick with threat. "We need to have us a conversation," Silas said, circling her like a predator. "About respect, about knowing your place." "I know my place," Harriet replied, gripping the tobacco stalks tighter. "It's right here, doing the work I was forced to do." "That's where you're wrong," Silas said, moving closer. "Your place is wherever I say it is, doing whatever I tell you to do." He reached out to grab her arm, his intention clear as day and twice as ugly. Harriet swung the bundle of tobacco stalks like a weapon, catching him across the face. Silas staggered back, more shocked than hurt, hand coming away from his cheek with blood from where the sharp stems had scratched. "Don't you touch me," Harriet said, her voice low and deadly. "Don't you ever put your hands on me like that." For a moment they stood frozen, he with murder in his eyes, she with defiance burning bright as gospel fire. Then Silas smiled, but it was the smile of a shark about to feed. "Oh, you done it now, girl. You done sealed your fate. That's assault on a white man. That's grounds for the most severe punishment Master Thorn can devise." "Then bring it," Harriet said. "Bring whatever evil you got planned. My body might be yours to abuse, but my soul belongs to me and to the ancestors, and that you can never touch." Silas left the barn walking quick, his face set in grim satisfaction. He went straight to Master Thorn, laying out the situation with careful lies mixed with truth. How Harriet Ross had grown increasingly rebellious, how she'd attacked him without provocation, how her defiance was spreading to other slaves and threatening the order of the plantation. "She needs to be made an example," Silas concluded. Something so severe that every nigger on this property thinks twice before they even dream of resistance. Master Thorne, who'd been losing slaves to the Underground Railroad and couldn't afford more defection, nodded slowly. "What do you suggest?" Silas had been planning this for weeks, ever since Harriet first looked him in the eye. "Special chains," he said. "Heavy irons for ankles, wrists, and neck. All connected so short she can't stand or lie properly. Lock her in the old root cellar under the big house. Keep her there till her spirit breaks. However long it takes." "How long you thinking?" Silas smiled his shark smile. 90 days should do it, 90 days and 90 nights. She'll either break or die. Either way, the problem's solved. Master Thorne considered this, calculating profits and losses in his mind. A dead slave was lost investment, but a rebellious slave could cost him much more through escaped property and inspired resistance. "Do it," he finally said. "But Silas, she better be alive at the end. I want her broken, not dead." "Oh, she'll be alive," Silas promised. "Broken, docile, suitable for sail downriver. I'll make sure of it." That evening, as the sun set blood-red over the cotton fields, they came for Harriet Ross. 6 men, Silas and 5 field drivers, surrounded her at the quarters just as the enslaved folks gathered for their meager supper. "Harriet Ross," Silas announced loud enough for everyone to hear, "you've been found guilty of insubordination and assault on a white man. Master Thorne has decreed your punishment." The blacksmith stood ready with freshly forged chains. Iron shackles connected by short links, designed to torture through constant discomfort. They were hot from the forge, still glowing faintly in the twilight. The enslaved folks of the quarters watched in horror and helpless rage as Silas ordered Harriet brought forward. She walked with her head high, refusing to be dragged, refusing to give them that satisfaction. "You got anything to say before we put these on you?" Silas asked, hungry for fear or pleading that never came. Harriet looked at her people, at the children who'd grown quiet with terror, at the old ones who'd seen this before too many times, at the young men whose hands balled into useless fists. She spoke loud enough for all to hear. The ancestors watching. Every chain got memory, every lash got witness. What you sow in cruelty, you're gonna reap in judgment. That's a promise. Then she looked directly at Silas Crow, and her voice dropped to a whisper only he could hear. "I'm gonna be the end of you. Mark my words, Overseer. One way or another, you and me gonna meet at the crossroads and only one of us walking away." Silas felt a chill despite the warm evening air. For just a moment he saw something in Harriet's eyes. Not just defiance, but prophecy. Not just anger, but absolute certainty. Then he laughed, shaking off the superstitious dread. "Big talk from a woman about to spend 90 nights in hell. Let's see how tough you are when them chains dig deep." They locked the irons on her, ankles first, then wrists, then the cruel collar around her neck that connected to all the others with chains so short she'd never stand upright or lie flat. The weight was immense, dragging at her like hands pulling her toward the grave. They dragged her toward the big house as the last light died from the sky. Toward the root cellar, that forgotten pit beneath the master's home where darkness lived permanent and rats ran fearless. Toward 90 nights of torment designed to break even the strongest spirit. But as they forced her down the cellar stairs into blackness that seemed to swallow light itself, Harriet Ross began to sing. Low and steady, a spiritual that carried across the plantation like a promise. "Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water." The cellar door slammed shut. The bolt shot home with a sound like doom itself. And in the quarters, the enslaved folks of Thorne's plantation wept and prayed, knowing they'd just witnessed the beginning of something terrible. But also, underneath the fear and grief, they felt something else stirring. Hope. Dangerous, powerful, revolutionary hope. Because they'd seen the look in Harriet's eyes, they'd heard the certainty in her voice. And they knew, deep in their souls where faith lives even in slavery's darkest pit, that this wasn't the end of Harriet Ross. This was just the beginning of her legend. Darkness swallowed Harriet whole as they dragged her down them cellar stairs. Darkness so thick it had weight, had texture pressed against her eyes like grave dirt. The chains clanked with every forced step, echoing off stone walls that wept moisture and whispered of forgotten suffering. This weren't no ordinary root cellar, child. This was a punishment pit, a place where Master Thorne's grandfather had tortured rebellious slaves back in the old days, where blood had soaked so deep into the earthen floor that even time couldn't wash it clean. The blacksmith had done his devil's work well. Them irons weren't just chains, they was instruments of calculated torture, forged with malicious precision. The ankle shackles bit deep, heavy as millstones, connected by links barely 18 inches long so Harriet couldn't take a full step. The wrist irons locked tight with maybe 2 feet of chain between them, just enough movement to torment without granting relief. But the cruelest piece was the neck collar, thick iron band with a short chain running down to the wrist shackles, forcing her head forward in permanent bow, like she was eternally submitting to Massa's will. Silas stood at the top of the stairs, torch in hand, casting demon shadows across his scarred face. 90 nights, girl, he called down, his voice dripping satisfaction sweet as poison honey. 90 nights to think about your place in this world, to remember that uppity niggers get broke like wild horses. Harriet said nothing, couldn't afford to waste breath on that devil. She focused on keeping her balance, on not falling with these chains that made every movement agony. The weight alone was crushing, maybe 60 pounds of iron total, designed to exhaust the body even standing still. "I'll be visiting you," Silas continued, descending 3 steps so the torchlight revealed his face fully. And Lord have mercy, what she saw there was worse than simple cruelty. It was hunger, dark, twisted desire mixed with rage, the look of a man who wanted to break her in ways that had nothing to do with chains. "We gonna have us some quality time down here in the dark, just you and me, and by the time them 90 nights is done, you gonna beg to please me." "The ancestors watching," Harriet said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her insides. "Every evil you do got witness. The dead don't forget, Overseer. They waiting for you on the other side." Silas laughed, but it sounded forced, hollow. Something in Harriet's words touched a nerve he didn't like acknowledging. That superstitious dread of haints and judgment that lived in even the wickedest hearts. "Ain't no dead folks here," he said. "Just you and me and these chains." He threw something down the stairs, a tin cup that clattered across stone. "That's for water. I'll bring you scraps when I remember," which might not be often. The torch withdrew. Footsteps ascended. The cellar door slammed shut with finality that echoed like coffin lids closing. The bolt shot home, heavy iron sliding through rusted loops, sealing her in this tomb of living death. Then came darkness absolute. Not the darkness of night where eyes adjust and shapes emerge. This was the blackness of deep earth, of places where light had never reached and never would. Darkness so complete Harriet couldn't see her own hands even when she brought them close to her face. The weight of the chains pulled at her constantly. Standing was agony. The neck collar forced her head down, back muscles screaming within minutes. Sitting was worse. The short chains meant she couldn't lean back, couldn't find any position that offered relief. Lying down was impossible. The connections were too short, leaving her in twisted half positions that brought no rest. Panic rose like floodwater. The walls seemed to press inward. The air tasted of mold and old suffering. Rats scurried in the corners, their squeaking mixing with the drip, drip, drip of water leaking from somewhere above. The earth beneath her was damp, cold seeping through her thin dress into her bones. "Lord," Harriet whispered, her voice breaking for the first time. "Lord, I can't. This is too much. I ain't strong enough for this." But even as despair threatened to drown her, something stirred in the darkness. Something older than slavery, deeper than chains. The ancestors were gathering, drawn by blood and suffering, and the ancient compact between the living and the dead. Harriet felt them press close. Grandmamas who'd survived the Middle Passage, grandfathers who'd died fighting, children who'd been sold away and never forgot home. "You strong enough," a voice whispered in Gullah tongue, "'cause you got us. You ain't alone down here, child. We here. We been here since the first chain was forged, and we gonna see you through." Harriet's breathing steadied. The panic receded like tide pulling back from shore. She was Harriet Ross, granddaughter of African queens, carrier of the sight, woman who'd rather die standing than live broken. These chains could bind her body but not her spirit. This darkness could hide her from the world but not from herself. She began to sing, low and quiet, a spiritual her mama had taught her. In the darkness of the night, when the storm is raging high, I can hear my Savior say, "Fear not, I am nigh." The rats fell silent, listening. The dripping water seemed to match her rhythm. And somewhere in that black pit beneath Master Thorne's big house, surrounded by the weight of iron and earth and ancestral memory, Harriet Ross found her strength. Night 1 of 90 had begun, and the Overseer had no idea what he'd unleashed by chaining up a woman who could see beyond the veil, who carried rootwork knowledge in her blood, who had the ancestors themselves standing guard in the darkness. Silas Crow thought he was breaking her. He was forging her into a weapon. Time lost all meaning in that darkness. Could have been hours, could have been days. Harriet couldn't tell no more. The chains weighed on her like the whole history of slavery pressing down. Every link forged from stolen freedom. Every rivet hammered with cruelty. Her neck ached fierce from the collar's constant pull. Her wrists had already started bleeding where the iron rubbed raw. Her ankles felt like they was being slowly sawed through by rusted metal teeth. But physical pain, bad as it was, weren't the worst torment. Worse was the isolation, the absolute separation from sky, from stars, from the sight of another human face. Down here in this forgotten pit, she could scream herself hoarse and nobody would hear. Could die and rot, and the world above would keep turning like she'd never existed. The rats grew bolder in the darkness. She could hear them chittering, feel them brush against her legs with their disease-carrying bodies. One got tangled in her skirt and she had to shake it loose, the chain on her wrists clanking loud enough to echo off the stone walls. The sound was terrible, reminded her she was bound, helpless, at the mercy of devils who had no mercy. "Mama," she whispered into the black. "Mama, if you can hear me across the distance, if prayers reach from slave quarters to whatever place they got you working now, pray for your daughter. 'Cause I'm scared, Mama. I'm scared like I ain't never been." And then, "Lord have mercy." She heard it, a voice speaking clear as spring water though no living soul was down there with her. "Harriet, Harriet, child, listen now." Her heart seized up. That voice belonged to old Rit, her mama from the other plantation, the woman who'd birthed her under that blood moon 32 years ago. But Mama was 50 miles away, couldn't possibly be here. Unless... "Who there?" Harriet called out, her voice stronger now, touched with something like hope. "Show yourself. Can't show what ain't got flesh no more, baby girl, but I'm here, we all here." The darkness shifted, not lightening exactly, but becoming less hostile. Less like a tomb and more like a womb, a place of transformation, of becoming. Harriet felt presences gather around her, felt the air grow thick with spirits who'd walked this earth in chains, and now walked free in whatever realm came after. "You carrying our blood, child," another voice said, deeper, older, speaking in that Gullah tongue mixed with pure African words that Harriet somehow understood in her bones. "You carrying our fight. Them chains on your body, we wore chains too. On the slave ships, in the fields, in the graves where they threw us unmarked. But chains don't reach past death, and we still here, still fighting through you." Visions came then, flooding through her mind like memories that weren't hers but belonged to the collective soul of enslaved people. She saw the Middle Passage, that hell voyage across the Atlantic where Africans were packed like cargo, chained in darkness worse than this cellar, breathing air thick with death and despair. She saw hundreds throw themselves overboard, choosing the ocean's embrace over slavery's chains. She saw revolts on ship decks, Africans fighting with bare hands against guns and whips, preferring death in battle to life in bondage. She saw auction blocks, Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans, where families was torn apart like ripping flesh from bone. Babies snatched from mothers' arms. Husbands sold south while wives screamed. Children standing confused and terrified while white men bid on them like livestock. She saw whipping posts across the South, saw backs flayed open, saw strong men reduced to weeping, saw women violated in ways that had no words, saw the cotton fields stretching endless under merciless sun, saw bodies bent and broken by labor that enriched white folk while killing black souls slow. But she also saw resistance. Oh Lord, the resistance. Saw slaves poisoning masters' food with herbs learned from African root doctors. Saw midnight meetings in hush harbors where revolution was whispered and freedom dreamed. Saw the Underground Railroad, that secret network of brave souls, black and white, who risked everything to shepherd people north. Saw Nat Turner with his visions of blood and judgment, Denmark Vesey planning his great uprising, Gabriel Prosser leading his doomed rebellion. We fought, the voices chorused around her. We always fought. In ways big and small, loud and quiet, we resisted. Some fought with weapons, some fought with poison, some fought by running. Some fought by refusing to break no matter how many times they was beaten. You part of that tradition now, child. You part of that long line of resistance. Harriet's tears fell hot and silent. But I'm just one woman, chained in darkness. How I supposed to fight from here? Survival is resistance, Old Rit's voice said, gentle but firm. Every breath you take down here is a victory. Every night you endure without breaking is another defeat for them that think they own you. Your body might be chained, but your spirit, that's yours alone. Guard it fierce, 'cause that spirit gonna carry you through these 90 nights. And when you rise from this pit, you gonna rise like vengeance itself. But first you got to live, the African ancestor's voice added. Got to be smart. That overseer coming back, and he bringing evil with him. We gonna teach you the old ways, the root work and conjure that our people brought across the water. Gonna show you how to protect yourself even in chains. The visions shifted. Now Harriet saw root doctors working their craft, mixing herbs and bone dust, speaking power words, drawing signs in dirt that glowed with spiritual force. She saw mojo bags that protected from harm, saw hot foot powder that drove enemies away, saw crossing spells that turned evil back on them that sent it. Gopher dust, a voice instructed. Earth from graves mixed with sulfur and salt. It's down here with you, in this very cellar where they buried troublesome slaves back in the old days. Feel along the walls, child. Find where the earth is disturbed. Gather that dust. When the overseer come, sprinkle it across his path. It won't stop him, but it'll weaken his power, make his evil thoughts confused. Harriet's hands, despite the chains, felt along the damp cellar floor. Her fingers found loose earth in one corner, soil that felt different, charged with old death and older power. She scooped some into her dress pocket, whispering the words the ancestors taught her. Dust to dust, death to death, turn the evil, steal his breath. By the power of the crossed-over dead, let his wickedness fall back on his head. The rats suddenly scattered, fleeing from the corner where Harriet knelt. The darkness seemed to pulse once like a heartbeat, acknowledging the working. I hear you, Harriet whispered to the spirits. I hear you, and I thank you. Now teach me more. Teach me how to survive this. Teach me how to make that overseer pay for every evil he'd done. And the ancestors, gathering thick as storm clouds in that cellar darkness, began their lessons. Night 1 was passing. 89 more to go. But Harriet Ross wasn't alone no more. She had the dead standing guard. And the dead, they patient, they persistent, and most important, they don't never forget. Morning came, though Harriet only knew it by the sound of roosters crowing somewhere far above, and the bell ringing for the field hands to rise. Down in her pit, darkness stayed thick as tar. Her body screamed for rest it couldn't find, muscles cramping from the chain's cruel positioning. The collar had rubbed her neck raw, blood crusting where iron met flesh. Her wrists and ankles weren't much better. Every slight movement brought fresh agony. But she'd survived the first night. That counted for something. The cellar door scraped open around what must have been midday. Light, even the dim glow from above, hurt her eyes fierce after so many hours in total black. Footsteps descended, and Harriet's stomach clenched when she recognized that measured tread. Silas Crow. He carried a lantern in one hand, a wooden bowl in the other. The light revealed the cellar in all its horror. Walls weeping moisture, rat droppings everywhere. The earthen floor stained dark with old blood and newer mold. And Harriet herself, proud woman now reduced to a chained figure hunched in the corner, dress soaked with sweat and worse. "Morning, girl," Silas said, his voice mockingly cheerful. "Sleep well?" Harriet said nothing, just watched him with eyes that held no fear, only cold calculation. She'd sprinkled the gopher dust across the threshold where he'd have to walk, whispering the words the ancestors taught her. Now she waited to see if old African magic still carried power in this Christian land. Silas set the bowl down just out of her reach. Cornmeal mush gone cold and slimy, barely fit for hogs. "That's your breakfast, dinner, and supper all in one. Hope you enjoy it." He stepped closer, crossing the line of gopher dust without noticing. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he stumbled slightly, catching himself against the wall with a confused expression. "Damn cellar," he muttered, "floor's uneven." But Harriet saw more, saw the dust clinging to his boots, saw the slight tremor in his hands that wasn't there before, saw confusion cloud his ice-cold eyes for just a second. The rootwork was taking hold, not strong enough to stop him, but enough to muddy his thoughts, make him less sure of himself. "You lookin' mighty pitiful down here," Silas said, recovering his swagger but not quite as confident as he'd been. "All that fire from before. Where's it now? Where's that uppity spirit that thought she could spit on white authority?" "Still here," Harriet said, her voice raspy from thirst but steady. "Chains don't reach the soul, Overseer. You can torture this body all you want. My spirit stays free." Silas's face darkened with rage. He crossed to where she sat and grabbed her chin, forcing her head up despite the collar's resistance. The pain was blinding, but Harriet refused to cry out. Wouldn't give him that satisfaction. "We gonna see how free your spirit is after a few more weeks down here," he hissed, his breath hot and foul. "Gonna see how tough you talk when you're covered in your own filth, when the rats start biting, when loneliness drives you clean out of your mind." His hand moved from her chin to her throat, fingers tightening just enough to threaten. "But I can make it easier for you. Much easier. All you got to do is submit. Be sweet to me. Give me what I want, and I'll bring you better food. Maybe even a blanket, shorten your sentence." Harriet looked him dead in the eyes. "I'd rather eat with rats than be touched by you. Rather die down here than let you defile me. You hearing me clear, devil? You ain't getting nothing from me but contempt." Silas's face went purple with fury. His hand drew back to strike, but then something strange happened. His arm trembled, wavered, dropped. Confusion crossed his features again, the gopher dust working deeper, making his violent impulses turn uncertain. You, he stammered, then shook his head hard like trying to clear cobwebs. "This ain't over. Not by a long shot. I'll be back tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Every single day for 90 nights. And each time I'm gonna offer you the same choice. Submit or suffer. Sooner or later, you gonna break." He turned to leave, then paused at the stairs. "Oh, and I got news from above. Your sister Rachel. Pretty little thing working in the big house. Master Thorne's thinking of selling her to a cotton plantation in Mississippi, deep south, where they work folks to death in 2 years. Unless someone with influence around here speaks up for her, someone like me." Ice flooded Harriet's veins. Rachel was just 19, gentle-spirited, wouldn't survive the brutality of deep south cotton fields. "You leave my sister alone," she said, the words coming out more plea than command. Silas smiled, sensing weakness at last. "That depends on you, don't it? You be nice to me. Maybe I convince the master to keep her here. You keep being stubborn, well, I hear them Mississippi plantations always needing fresh workers." He climbed the stairs, boots heavy on stone. The door slammed, the bolt shot home. Darkness returned like a punishment. Harriet sat in the black, trembling with rage and fear. They'd found her weakness, not her own suffering, but the suffering of those she loved. That was always how they broke strong ones, by threatening kin, by making you choose between your own dignity and your family's safety. But then, soft as whisper, she heard scratching at the cellar door. The sound of something being pushed through the crack beneath. A voice, one of the house slaves, barely audible. "Harriet, it's Esther. I'm leaving cornbread here, just a piece, and water in a jar. Can you reach?" Harriet's heart swelled. Esther was elderly, had raised 3 generations of enslaved children in the quarters, was respected by everyone. For her to risk Silas's wrath by sneaking food was an act of pure love. "I can reach," Harriet called back softly. "Thank you, Auntie. We praying for you, child, all of us. Don't you worry about Rachel. That girl's got sense. She knows to hide when the overseer comes around. We looking after her." Over the next hours, others came too. Moses, the field hand, leaving dried meat wrapped in cloth. Young Sarah, bringing a small jar of salve for Harriet's wounds. Old Uncle Josiah, whispering prayers through the door and leaving a tiny mojo bag he'd made with protective herbs. "You ain't alone," he said. "Never think you alone. We all down there with you in spirit." And Harriet realized something powerful. Silas thought he was isolating her, breaking her through solitude, but instead, he'd made her a martyr, a symbol of resistance that unified the enslaved community. Every night she survived made her stronger in their eyes, and them stronger in hers. The ancestors had been right. Survival was resistance. Every breath an act of defiance. And when Silas came back the next day with the same cruel offers and ugly threats, Harriet met him with the same unflinching gaze. When he came the day after that, she sang spirituals that made him uncomfortable. When he came the day after that, she spoke prophecies learned from the dead, told him about the judgment waiting for men who abused the powerless, about how the wicked never die easy. Each visit left him more frustrated, more confused by the goofer dust she renewed daily, more disturbed by this woman who wouldn't break no matter what he threatened. But then came night 7, and Silas descended those stairs with new determination and a bottle of whiskey courage in his belly. And that night, the devil finally tried to take what he'd been wanting all along. That 7th night, Silas came down drunk and dangerous. Harriet heard it in his stumbling footsteps, smelled it in the whiskey fumes that preceded him like a warning. The lantern swung wild in his grip, casting demon shadows across the cellar walls. His ice eyes were bloodshot now, filled with frustrated rage and liquor-fueled desire. "Time's come for us to have a real understanding," he slurred, setting the lantern down and unbuckling his belt. "Been patient with you, been merciful, but my patience done run out." Harriet's heart hammered fierce, but her voice stayed steady. "Touch me and you cursed, Overseer. The ancestors watching, the dead gonna claim you for this." Silas laughed, harsh, bitter sound. "Ain't no dead folks here, just you and me and what's about to happen." He moved toward her, and Harriet did the only thing she could. She screamed. Screamed loud enough to wake the haints, to rattle the chains of every slave who'd ever died in bondage. The sound echoed off stone walls, multiplied, became a chorus of fury. And something answered. The lantern flame guttered and surged, casting Silas's shadow huge and monstrous against the wall. The temperature dropped sudden, so cold their breath misted. The rats fled, squealing, and Silas froze because he felt it too. The presence of something ancient and angry gathering in that cellar. "What the?" he whispered, spinning around. "What's that?" Harriet saw what he couldn't, the spirits manifesting, taking form from shadow and memory. Her grandmother stood there, proud African woman in traditional dress. Her mother, old Rit, with tears streaming down her face. 100 others behind them, all the souls who died in this plantation's service, who'd been buried in unmarked graves, who'd never stopped watching. "Leave her," they said with one voice. A sound like wind through cemetery trees, like chains breaking, like judgment itself. "Leave her or face us." Silas stumbled backward, terror sobering him quick. He couldn't see the spirits clear, but he felt them, felt the weight of their accumulated rage, felt ghostly hands pushing at him, felt the air thick with supernatural warning. You did this," he accused Harriet, grabbing his belt and backing toward the stairs. "You some kind of witch. Some kind of conjure woman. I'm a woman under protection, Harriet said, her voice ringing with power borrowed from the dead. And you've been marked, Overseer, marked for judgment. The ancestors got your measure now. They gonna follow you wherever you go. Gonna whisper in your dreams. Gonna wait for you at the crossroads when your time comes. Silas fled up the stairs, the lantern forgotten in his panic. The door slammed. His footsteps pounded away into the night above. Harriet collapsed against the wall, shaking with relief and exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered to the spirits still gathered around her. "Thank you for standing guard." "We always hear," her grandmother said. "But child, you got to understand something. We can protect your spirit, can turn away the worst evil, but we can't free your body. That work, that's yours to do. And it's gonna take all your strength, all your cunning, all your faith." The spirits began to fade, but before they vanished completely, they gave her a gift. A vision so powerful it felt more real than the cellar around her. Harriet saw herself walking free under stars bright as promises, saw the North Star, that drinking gourd constellation, guiding her steps through dense forest and across cold rivers, saw safe houses with candles burning in windows, saw Quaker folk offering bread and shelter, saw other runaways following her lead like Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt. She saw herself returning south, not once but many times, slipping past paddy rollers and bloodhounds, moving through the network of the Underground Railroad like water finding its path. Saw families she'd rescue, children she'd carry to freedom, old folks she'd guide across that final river into Pennsylvania's promised land. But the vision showed more, showed a great war coming, brother fighting brother, the whole nation split over the question of slavery. Showed President Lincoln signing papers that would break chains across the South. Showed black soldiers in Union blue fighting for their own liberation. Showed the day when slavery itself would die, when the auction blocks would crumble and the whipping posts would rot. "This the future," the ancestors whispered. "This what you fighting for. This why you got to survive these 90 nights. 'Cause you got destiny waiting, child. You gonna be called Moses by your people. You gonna lead hundreds to freedom. You gonna live to see slavery fall." Harriet wept, not from pain but from overwhelming hope. The vision filled her with strength that transcended the chains, that made the suffering bearable because it had purpose. She wasn't just surviving for herself. She was surviving for all the people she'd save, for the children who'd be born free because of her courage, for the future generations who'd tell her story. "I'm ready," she said into the darkness. "Whatever it takes, however long these chains stay on. I'm ready. Show me what I need to know. Teach me how to turn this suffering into power." And the ancestors, bless their persistent spirits, began the deep teaching, showed her how to conserve strength in captivity, how to keep mind sharp when body weakened, how to remember who she was when the world tried to make her forget, taught her the old songs that carried code, the spirituals that mapped escape routes, the work chants that organized resistance. "Wade in the water, children," they sang. "Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water." That meant use rivers to throw off the dogs tracking your scent. "Follow the drinking gourd," they chanted. "Follow the drinking gourd. The old man is waiting for to carry you to freedom." That meant follow the North Star to the Underground Railroad conductors. "Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home." That meant freedom's coming. Hold on just a little longer. Night 7 passed into night 8, then 10, then 15. Harriet's body weakened. The meager food, the constant pain, the impossible sleeping positions all taking their toll. But her spirit grew stronger, tempered in this darkness like steel in forge fire. Silas still came, but less frequently now, and always in daylight, never alone. The goofer dust and the spirits had marked him good. He'd wake screaming from nightmares about chains and judgment, see shadows move in corners of his vision, hear whispers in empty rooms. The other enslaved folk kept bringing small offerings, food, water, prayers whispered through the door. And Harriet kept surviving, kept singing, kept holding on to the vision of freedom that burned bright as the North Star in her mind. 45 nights passed. Halfway through her sentence, and the worst was yet to come. Night 47 brought treachery wrapped in kindness. Harriet was drifting in that half-world between waking and vision when she heard urgent whispers at the cellar door. Not the usual supporters bringing food. This voice was younger, male, desperate. "Harriet, Harriet Ross, you hear me?" She dragged herself toward the sound, chains clanking. "Who there?" "It's Marcus. From the Cotton Gin. Listen close, we planning something, a revolt. Tomorrow night when the moon's dark, gonna rise up, kill the Overseer'S, burn the big house, head north in a group. We need to know. You with us? You still got fight in you?" Harriet's heart leaped. A revolt, like Nat Turner's, like Gabriel Prosser's, like all them brave uprisings that had been crushed in blood but never forgotten. Every enslaved soul dreamed of that day when they'd throw off chains and take vengeance on their oppressors. But something felt wrong. Marcus worked close to Master Thorne, had access to the house, was trusted more than most. And the ancestors, they was stirring restless, whispering warnings she couldn't quite hear clear. "Marcus," she said carefully. "Who else know about this? Who's leading?" "Can't say names through the door," he replied quick. "Too dangerous. Just tell me, you in or not? They saying if Harriet Ross joins, everybody gonna follow. You a symbol now. Your resistance in these chains done inspired the whole plantation. Pride wanted her to say yes. Rage wanted her to agree. But wisdom, that deep knowing the ancestors had been teaching, made her pause. I need to think on it. Come back tomorrow, same time." "Ain't got time for thinking," Marcus hissed, voice rising with panic that seemed performative. False. "It's tomorrow or never. Master Thorne getting ready to sell off 20 folk. We gotta move now." "Then move," Harriet said, voice hard as iron. "But I ain't giving my word till I know more. Revolts need planning, need weapons, need routes to freedom. What y'all got?" Silence stretched long. Then Marcus said, quiet and defeated, "Nothing. We got nothing but our rage. That gonna have to be enough." He left without another word, and Harriet sat in darkness, mind racing. Something was rotten about that whole exchange. Felt like a trap, like someone testing her to see if she'd confess to rebellion so they could justify harsher punishment. Morning proved her instincts right. Silas descended the stairs with Master Thorne himself. First time the master had come down since Harriet's imprisonment began. Thorne was a thin man with eyes like a circling buzzard, always calculating profit and loss. "Tell me about the revolt," Thorne said without preamble. "Don't know nothing about no revolt," Harriet replied, meeting his gaze. "Marcus says different. Says you were enthusiastic about joining. Says you're the ringleader even from down here." So it had been a test. Marcus was either a traitor by nature or had been coerced into betraying his people. Either way, the trap had failed because Harriet hadn't fallen into it. "Marcus lied," she said simply. "Or he was sent to lie to me. Either way, I said nothing that could be used against me." Thorne studied her with something like reluctant respect. "You're clever, too clever for your own good. That makes you dangerous." "I'm a woman in chains," Harriet said. "How dangerous can I be?" "More than you know," Thorne replied. "Your resistance has become infectious. The other slaves look at you and think rebellion is noble. That's a problem for me." He nodded to Silas. "I'm changing the terms. Instead of 90 nights, she'll stay down here until she breaks completely. However long that takes. And Silas, I'm authorizing you to use whatever methods necessary, short of death, to achieve that goal." Harriet's blood ran cold. 90 nights had been a torture with an end date, something to survive toward. But indefinite imprisonment, that was a death sentence drawn out slow. Silas smiled his shark smile. "Thank you, Master. I'll handle it personal." After Thorne left, Silas lingered. "You should have taken the bait," he said. "Should have confessed to the revolt. Would have been quick, hanging maybe, over in minutes. But now you gonna rot down here till your mind goes, till you're begging to please me just for the mercy of human contact." "The mind can't be broken by loneliness," Harriet said, "when you got the ancestors for company." "Still talking about dead folks?" Silas shook his head. "That blow to your head really did make you simple. but we gonna see how long your imaginary friends sustain you. Days? Weeks? Months? He ascended the stairs, but before closing the door, he delivered the cruelest blow yet. Oh, and Marcus? He's being rewarded for his loyalty, made driver over the field hands. And your sister Rachel? She'll be reporting to him direct. Hope he treats her kind. The door slammed. The bolt shot home, and Harriet screamed. Not from pain, but from rage so pure it felt like it could crack stone. That betrayal cut deeper than chains. Marcus had sold out his people for a position of petty power, had endangered Rachel, had destroyed the tentative plans for freedom that might have been real. But worse, the enslaved community would be fractured now. They'd suspect each other, wonder who else might be a traitor. Trust, that precious commodity in bondage, would shatter. Lord, Harriet prayed through tears of fury. Lord, I know vengeance is yours, but please, let me be your instrument. Let me live to see justice done, not just to Silas, but to all who profit from our suffering. The ancestors gathered close, their presence a comfort in that blackest moment. Betrayal always reveals itself, they whispered. The traitor never prospers long. Marcus Dunn signed his own fate. The people gonna deal with him in their own way, in their own time. You just focus on surviving. But survival was getting harder. Without a definite end date, without that light at the end of the tunnel, despair crept in like rising floodwater. Harriet's body was failing, infected wounds, fever coming and going, weight dropping till her bones showed through skin. The chains had rubbed raw places down to bone in some spots, and the visions, once a source of strength, began to confuse reality. She'd wake not knowing if she was in the cellar or on a slave ship in the Middle Passage, would hear her mother calling and answer, only to realize she was alone, would see freedom paths in the darkness, would start walking, would crash into walls because the vision and reality was merging in dangerous ways. Night 50, night 60. Harriet lost count, lost track of time completely. Days and nights blurred into one long darkness punctuated by Silas's visits, by scraps of food pushed under the door, by fever dreams and ancestor visions all tangled together. She was dying. Slowly but surely, the chains and isolation was killing her. And that's when the real miracle happened. That's when the water started coming. Note: the narrative now reveals what truly happened at night 45, the turning point. The water came slow at first, just a trickle seeping through the cellar walls after days of heavy rain. But in that parched pit where Harriet had been dying by inches, that water was baptism and rebirth. It pooled in the lowest corner, cold and clean, and she dragged herself to it like a pilgrim to sacred spring. She drank deep, felt strength returning to her fever-racked body, splashed her face, washed her wounds as best she could with shackled hands. And as the water touched her skin, the visions came clearer than ever before, sharp as broken glass, true as gospel testimony. This the crossing place, the ancestors said, halfway between death and life, between bondage and freedom. What you choose now gonna determine everything. Harriet saw herself in that water's reflection, but changed. No longer the woman who'd been dragged down here weeks ago. This woman had eyes like flint, spirit tempered hard as Damascus steel. This woman had walked through fire and emerged as something new. You survived 45 nights, her grandmother's spirit said. That's a powerful number. The Israelites wandered 40 years. Jesus fasted 40 days. 45 nights you've been tested and you ain't broke. Now we're gonna show you something. The water's surface rippled, though no wind touched it. Images formed, not visions of the future now, but of the present moment up above in the world she'd been taken from. She saw the plantation at night, saw Marcus the traitor walking between the quarters and the Overseer'S cabin, carrying information, selling out his people for scraps of power. Saw him whispering to Silas about who was planning escape, who was slowing down work, who was teaching others to read in secret. Every betrayal marked in Harriet's mind like tally marks of sin. But she also saw resistance continuing, saw old Uncle Josiah leading midnight prayer meetings in the woods, calling on the Lord for deliverance. Saw young Sarah teaching children their letters using a Bible stolen from the big house, creating a school in secret that would give future generations the tools to fight. Saw Moses, the field hand, the real one, not the traitor, organizing work slowdowns so subtle the overseers couldn't prove nothing. And she saw her sister Rachel, saw that precious girl praying on her knees every night, praying for Harriet's survival, praying for strength. Saw Rachel avoiding Marcus with wisdom beyond her years, staying close to the older women who protected her. "Your people still fighting," the ancestors said. "You ain't alone in this struggle, never been alone. And they need you to survive because you gonna be the one who shows them freedom is possible." The vision shifted again. Now Harriet saw Silas Crow in his cabin, and what she witnessed made her blood sing with righteous fury. She saw him counting money, rewards for returned runaways he'd captured, for slaves he'd broken and made docile, for betrayals reported and rebellions crushed. Saw him drinking himself mean every night, haunted by the spirits he pretended not to believe in. But most important, she saw his fear, saw him wake sweating from nightmares where chains closed around his own neck, where he drowned in dark water, where enslaved folk he'd tormented rose from graves to drag him down. The goofer dust and the ancestor spirits had marked him deep. He was cursed, and he knew it even if he wouldn't admit it. "The weapon you need is coming," the ancestors whispered. "The water that's saving your life now, it gonna rise. Storms coming in 3 days like the one what brought the flood in Noah's time. This cellar gonna fill waist deep with water, and that's when you make your move." "How?" Harriet asked the darkness. "I'm still in chains, still locked in." "The chain's gonna be your weapon," they said. "Remember, we've been teaching you. Survival first, then resistance, then retribution. The overseer thinks he broke you, thinks you near death. His confidence gonna make him careless. When he comes down during the flood to check if you drowned, that's when you strike." They showed her exactly how, the chain connecting her wrists, if she could wrap it around his neck, if she could use the water's depth to her advantage, if she could call on the strength of every ancestor who'd resisted, she could drown him, turn his own cruelty back on him like a curse fulfilled. 3 days, Harriet whispered, mind sharp now, fever burned away by purpose. 3 days and this ends. She spent those days preparing, conserved every bit of strength, ate the scraps of food brought by sympathetic slaves, exercised her muscles as best she could with the chains, practiced the motion, looping the chain, pulling tight, holding underwater, used the rising water to rehearse, imagining Silas's struggling weight. And she prayed. Lord, how she prayed. Called on Jesus who'd overturned tables and driven out money changers, on Moses who'd struck down the Egyptian taskmaster, on Jael who'd driven a tent spike through the oppressor's skull, on every righteous warrior in Scripture who'd struck back against injustice. If this be sin, she prayed, then let me be a sinner. But I believe with everything in me, that you on the side of the oppressed, that you hear the cries of the captive, that you the God who breaks chains and drowns slave masters in the Red Sea. So use me, make me your instrument of judgment. The ancestors gathered thick as storm clouds, adding their voices to her prayer. Every soul who'd died in bondage, every mother who'd lost children to the auction block, every man who'd been worked to death in cotton fields, they all testified in agreement. This wasn't murder. This was justice delayed but never denied. The storm arrived on the 87th night, a hurricane-force tempest that made the big house shake and sent rain cascading through every crack and crevice. The cellar began to flood serious, water rising inch by inch till it was knee-deep, then thigh-deep, cold as judgment itself. Harriet stood in it, chains weighing her down, but spirit lifted high. She was Harriet Ross, granddaughter of African queens. She was the woman who'd survived the Middle Passage in ancestral memory. She was every enslaved soul who'd ever yearned for freedom. She was retribution incarnate. And when dawn came, when the storm was still raging, when Silas Crow descended those stairs to check if his prisoner had drowned, she was ready. The ancestors were ready, the water was ready, and the long night of slavery was about to meet its morning. The water kept rising through that 87th night, climbing past Harriet's waist, soaking into her torn dress, making the chains even heavier with the added weight of wetness. But she stood firm, anchored by purpose stronger than iron. The cold didn't matter no more. The pain didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the moment coming with dawn. The ancestors pressed close, so thick around her the very air seemed to pulse with their presence. She could see them now, not just feel them. Grandmother in her African wraps, old Rit with work-worn hands, strangers who died on this plantation decades ago, their names forgotten, but their spirits still raging against injustice. Children torn from mothers and sold away, men whipped to death, women violated and discarded. All of them gathered for this reckoning. "Remember everything we taught you," they said in chorus. "The chain is your weapon. The water is your ally. His confidence is your advantage. And our strength, all of us together, flows through you now." Harriet tested the chains one more time. The wrist shackles, connected by maybe 2 feet of links, long enough to loop around a man's neck if you moved fast, short enough to pull tight with leverage. She practiced the motion in the dark water, feeling how the chain cut through liquid, how much force she'd need, how to brace herself against his weight. "I'm ready," she whispered. "Whatever comes, I'm ready." Above, through the storm's roar, she heard movement. The big house was waking. Voices called out about the flooding. Someone yelled about checking the cellar, about the valuable property locked down there that might drown if the water got too high. Footsteps approached, heavy boots on wet ground. The cellar door scraped open, rain pouring in from outside. Lantern light spilled down the stairs, reflecting off the standing water that now reached mid-thigh on a tall man. "Jesus Christ," she heard Silas mutter. "This cellar's half flooded." He descended slowly, careful on the slick steps holding the lantern high. When he reached the bottom and saw Harriet standing in the water, still chained but somehow looking stronger than when he'd last seen her, confusion crossed his scarred face. "You still alive?" he said, almost disappointed. "Thought for sure you'd have given up by now. Drowned yourself deliberate rather than face another day." "Hard to drown when you got ancestors holding your head above water," Harriet replied, her voice carrying an edge that made him pause. Silas laughed, but it sounded nervous. "Still talking crazy. Well, Master wants me to move you somewhere drier. Can't have you dying before we break you proper. That'd be a waste of investment." He waded toward her, setting the lantern on a high shelf. Water reached his thighs, making movement slow, difficult. He had to focus on keeping his balance, on not slipping on the muddy floor beneath the flood. That was his first mistake. Getting close without thinking about what a desperate woman with nothing to lose might do. His second mistake was reaching for her with both hands, trying to check the chains, see if he could unlock them and move her. His third mistake, the fatal one, was underestimating what 90 nights of suffering had forged in her soul. Harriet moved like lightning blessed by thunder. Her shackled hands came up fast, the chain between them looping over Silas's head before he could react. She yanked hard, pulling the chain tight against his throat, using every ounce of strength the ancestors had been building in her. Silas's eyes went wide with shock and terror. His hands flew to his neck, trying to pry the chain loose, but Harriet had leverage now. She twisted, using the water's resistance to her advantage, pulling him off balance. He stumbled, went down on one knee in the flood. "This for every person you broke," Harriet hissed through gritted teeth, pulling tighter. "Every back you scarred, every soul you tormented." Silas thrashed, stronger than her even with weeks of imprisonment weakening her body. He threw his weight backward, trying to slam her against the wall. They crashed together, but Harriet held on, wrapping her legs around his torso to anchor herself, the chain biting deeper into his throat. He couldn't scream. The chain crushed his windpipe. Couldn't call for help. Could only gurgle and fight as his face turned purple, as his eyes bulged, as death came for him the same way he'd brought it to so many others. "You thought you could break me?" Harriet whispered in his ear, voice cold as the water around them. Thought 90 nights in chains would make me docile? You just made me stronger, made me into the weapon that's gonna kill you. Silas's struggles weakened. He clawed at the chain, at her arms, drawing blood. But his strength was fading fast. The water that had been baptizing Harriet was now becoming his grave. With one final surge of ancestral power flowing through her, Harriet yanked hard and twisted, forcing Silas's head under the water. She held him there, chains tight, legs locked around him, watching the bubbles rise as he drowned in the flood that had been meant to kill her. The ancestors sang, a sound like victory, like justice, like chains breaking across the south. The water turned red where Silas had scratched her, mixing their blood in testimony to this moment of retribution. His body went limp. The struggling stopped. Silas Crow, terror of the plantation, drowned in a cellar flood by the woman he'd tried to break. Harriet held him under a moment longer, making sure. Then she released the chain, let his body float face down in the murky water. Her hands shook. Her whole body shook. She'd killed a man, taken a life. But the ancestors gathered close, their voices gentle now, comforting. You didn't murder, child. You executed. There's a difference. That man had blood of hundreds on his hands. You just balanced the scales. Harriet's fingers fumbled in Silas's pockets, searching frantically. There, the keys, the blessed keys to her shackles. With trembling hands, she unlocked the ankle irons first. The weight falling away felt like resurrection itself. Then the wrist shackles. Oh Lord, the relief. Finally, the cursed neck collar. It clattered into the water, sinking like the evil it represented. For the first time in 90 nights, Harriet stood unchained, free. Note: the narrative reveals this was actually night 90, the final night of the original sentence. Harriet stood over Silas's floating corpse, free of chains but still imprisoned in this cellar. The storm raged above, masking any sound of struggle that might have escaped. She had minutes, maybe less, before someone came looking for the Overseer, before they discovered what she'd done, before the full fury of white justice came down on her head like the wrath of an angry god. But the ancestors were already showing her the path. The keys, child. Check his other pocket. He got the cellar key there too. She plunged her hands back into the dead man's coat, fighting revulsion as her fingers touched cold flesh. There, another key, larger, iron dark with age. The key to her prison. Harriet waded to the stairs, each step feeling strange without the weight of chains dragging at her. Her legs wanted to buckle. 90 nights of disuse had wasted her muscles. But she forced herself upward, gripping the wet stone walls for support. The key clutched tight in her fist like salvation itself. At the top, she paused, listened hard over the storm's howling, heard nothing but wind and rain and thunder rolling across Maryland like the voice of judgment. The big house was quiet, everyone still sleeping through the tempest, trusting Silas to handle the situation below. She turned the key in the lock. It stuck, rusted from years of damp. Harriet pulled it out, spit on it, worked it back in, whispering prayers older than Christianity. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Fresh air hit her face like a blessing. Rain poured down from black skies, washing away weeks of filth and blood. Harriet stumbled into the storm, fell to her knees in the mud, and wept. Great heaving sobs of relief and release. Free. She was free, but not safe. Never safe in this cursed land where her skin marked her as property. Move, child, the ancestors urged. Time for mourning later. Right now, you gotta run. Harriet forced herself up, orienting in the darkness. The quarters lay east of the big house. She could see the dim outlines of cabins through the rain. She needed to warn her people, needed to say goodbye, needed to tell Rachel she was alive. She ran, stumbling through the storm, splashing through puddles, her bare feet finding the path by memory. The quarters were dark, everyone huddled inside against the weather. She burst into the cabin where Rachel slept with 3 other house slaves. "Rachel," she hissed, shaking her sister awake. "Rachel, wake up." Rachel's eyes opened, went wide with shock. "Harriet! Lord Jesus, Harriet!" She threw her arms around her sister, sobbing. "You alive? We thought, Silas said you was near death, said you'd probably drown in the flood. Silas is dead, Harriet said flatly. I killed him, drowned him in the cellar, and now I got to run before they find him and come for me. The other women in the cabin sat up, listening with horror and awe. News like this would spread through the quarters faster than wildfire. By morning, every enslaved soul on Thorne's plantation would know. Harriet Ross had killed the overseer and escaped. You gotta come with me, Harriet said to Rachel. Both of us can make it north. I know the way, been seeing it in visions for months. The Underground Railroad, safe houses, Quaker folk who'll hide us. But Rachel shook her head, tears streaming. I can't, sister, I'm too scared, them patty rollers, them dogs. I can't run through that, but you go. You strong enough for both of us, you get free, and someday you come back for me. Promise? Harriet gripped her sister's hands. I promise. On everything holy, I promise. I'm gonna come back, gonna become a conductor on that railroad, gonna lead dozens to freedom, and you gonna be first among them. She looked at the other women. Tell the people what happened here. Tell them Harriet Ross fought back. Tell them the overseer bled just like we bleed, died just like we die. Tell them resistance is possible. Tell them freedom is possible. And tell them Moses is coming to lead y'all out of this Egypt. Old Esther, the same who'd snuck food through the cellar door, touched Harriet's cheek. You already Moses, child. Been Moses since you walked into them chains with your head high. Now go. The ancestors riding with you. Can't nobody catch what the spirit's protecting. Harriet stood, her body screaming with exhaustion but her spirit soaring. She took a piece of cornbread someone offered, tied it in cloth, accepted a ragged shawl against the rain. Let them press small offerings into her hands. A knife, matches wrapped in oilcloth, a tiny vial of water blessed by old Uncle Josiah's prayers. One more thing, Harriet said. Marcus, the traitor. He's marked now. The ancestors seen what he done. Justice coming for him too in its own time. She slipped back into the storm, heading for the woods that bordered the plantation. Behind her, the quarters came alive with whispered excitement, revolution contained in hushed voices, hope spreading like fire through dry grass. The forest swallowed her. Pine trees towered dark against darker sky, their branches thrashing in wind. Harriet moved by instinct and vision, following a path she'd seen in dreams. North, always north, toward the drinking gourd constellation hidden behind storm clouds but burning bright in her mind's eye. Behind her, maybe a mile distant now, she heard it. The bell ringing alarm from the big house. They'd found Silas, found him floating dead in the flooded cellar. Any minute now, the patty rollers would ride out with dogs and guns and rope. But Harriet Ross wasn't the same woman who'd been dragged into that cellar 90 nights ago. That woman had been strong but uncertain. This woman, this Moses, was forged steel, tempered in darkness, quenched in ancestral power. She'd survived what would have killed most folks. She'd struck back against evil. She'd broken her own chains. And now she was going to show her people how to break theirs. The rain washed her trail clean. The storm covered her escape. And the ancestors ran with her. Grandmother beside her, mother behind her. All the dead who'd yearned for this moment surrounding her like an army of righteous ghosts. Follow the drinking gourd, Harriet sang under her breath. The spiritual transformed from lament into victory anthem. The old man is waiting for to carry you to freedom. Follow the drinking gourd. 90 nights in hell. 1 night of retribution. And now, freedom's long road stretching ahead into a future bright with promise and peril. Harriet Ross was free. But more than that, she was awakened, transformed, reborn, and she would return. Dawn broke gray and terrible over Thorne's plantation. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean, but the hearts of men stained darker than before. Master Thorne stood at the cellar entrance, staring down at the scene below. Water still ankle deep, Silas Crow's body floating face down like judgment incarnate, chains scattered on the stone floor like shed skin. "Get him out," Thorne ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "And search every inch of this property. That nigger woman couldn't have gotten far." But Harriet was already miles away, moving through swampland where dogs couldn't track, following paths shown to her by the ancestors. The paddy rollers rode out with bloodhounds baying, but every trail went cold. It was like she'd vanished into air, transformed into spirit, became legend before she even reached freedom. Back at the plantation, they hauled Silas's corpse from the cellar. The marks on his neck told the story clear. He'd been strangled with the chains meant to bind his victim. The terror frozen on his dead face suggested he'd seen something in those final moments, something that haunted him even as life fled. "Witchcraft," some whispered. That woman was a conjure woman. Probably cursed him soon as they locked her down there. Others knew better. Knew it wasn't magic but pure human resistance, the refusal to be broken, the courage to strike back even from the depths of captivity. Knew that Harriet Ross had shown them something powerful, that the enslaved weren't helpless, that overseers could bleed, that chains could be broken. In the quarters that morning, despite the fear of reprisal hanging heavy, there was something else. Pride. Fierce, dangerous pride. The enslaved folk of Thorne's plantation went about their work with heads held slightly higher, backs slightly straighter. They'd lost their champion, but they'd gained a legend. Old Uncle Josiah led prayers that night in the hush harbor deep in the woods. "Lord," he intoned, "we thank you for delivering our sister from bondage. We thank you for showing us that resistance brings results. We thank you for proving that the wicked don't always triumph. And we ask, we beg, watch over Harriet wherever she's running. Guide her feet to freedom. Make her a beacon for all of us still trapped in Egypt's grip." "Amen," the gathered folks responded. Amen and amen. But there was another prayer meeting that night, this one darker, twisted. Marcus the trader, drunk on the power of his new position as driver, gathered other house slaves he thought he could trust. "That crazy woman killed a white man," he said. "Master gonna make all of us pay for what she done. They gonna sell us off, split up families, send us deep south. And for what? So one uppity woman could have her revenge? You the one what betrayed her," someone said quietly. "You the one what pretended to plan revolt just to trap her. Don't put this evil on her head when it sprouted from your own rotten heart." Marcus's face twisted with rage. He raised his hand to strike, but something stopped him. A cold wind, though the night was still and warm. A presence in the shadows that made his skin crawl. The ancestors were watching, and they had long memories. Over the following weeks, Thorne tried to track Harriet. Posted notices, offered rewards. $50, then $100, then $300 for her capture. But she'd melted into the network of the Underground Railroad, guided by Quakers and free blacks, moving ever northward like a ghost pursuing dawn. The plantation never recovered its equilibrium. Thorne had to hire a new overseer, a man named Fletcher who was cruel but not stupid. Fletcher knew what happened to Silas, knew that fear could cut both ways. He ruled with an iron fist, yes, but also with caution, always watching his back, never quite turning his gaze from the enslaved folk under his control. And Marcus? Lord, the ancestors' justice came swift. 3 weeks after Harriet's escape, he was working the gin when the machine malfunctioned. His hand got caught in the mechanism, crushed so bad they had to amputate at the wrist. He survived, but he was useless as a driver after that. Thorne sold him south to a cotton plantation, where one-handed men picked till they dropped. "That's what comes from betraying your own people," old Esther said when she heard. "The ancestors don't forget, don't forgive neither." Meanwhile, Harriet was reaching Pennsylvania, crossing that freedom line with tears of joy and exhaustion. She found work in Philadelphia, saved every penny, and within months she was planning her first rescue mission back south. She couldn't rest, couldn't enjoy her own freedom while her people still suffered. True to her word to Rachel, Harriet returned to Maryland that winter, slipped past patrols in darkness, moving like wind through familiar woods. She found her sister at a secret meeting spot and led her north along with 3 other folks desperate for freedom. They traveled by night, hid by day, following the North Star, just like the spiritual said. That was the first trip of 19. Over the next decade, Harriet became the most famous conductor on the Underground Railroad. Moses, they called her, and the name fit. She led over 300 souls to freedom, never lost a single passenger, carried a pistol, and wasn't afraid to use it on anyone who tried to turn back. "You gonna be free or die," she'd tell frightened runaways. "But you ain't gonna be a slave again, not while I'm leading this train." The legend of the 90 Nights spread through the slave-holding South like fire through dry cotton. Mothers told their daughters about the woman who survived unbreakable chains. Fathers whispered to sons about the overseer who drowned in his own evil. And everywhere enslaved people heard the story. They felt something spark inside. Hope, rage, determination. Back at Thorne's plantation, they never spoke Harriet's name aloud if they could help it. It was bad luck, they said. Might conjure her spirit. Might bring down the same judgment that fell on Silas Crow. The cellar was sealed up, never used again. Some claimed they heard chains rattling down there on stormy nights, heard a woman singing spirituals, heard an overseer's death scream echoing through the years. But in the quarters, in those sacred spaces where the enslaved told their own history, preserved their own truth, Harriet's story lived bright and powerful. It was whispered from generation to generation, changed and embellished over time, but keeping its essential truth. A woman went into hell in chains and emerged free. A woman struck down her oppressor with the very bonds meant to enslave her. A woman became Moses and led her people home. And when the Civil War finally came, when the nation split over the question of slavery, when black soldiers in Union Blue marched south singing freedom songs, Harriet was there too. She served as scout, spy, nurse, and warrior. She lived to see slavery abolished, lived to see the chains broken across the entire South, lived to be an old woman telling her story to young ones who'd never known bondage. "You suffered?" they'd ask. "Suffered something terrible," she'd reply. "But you resisted?" "With everything I had, every breath was resistance. Every night I survived was victory. And you're here now, free." "Free," she'd confirm, though her wrists still bore the scars of iron, though her neck still showed the collar's marks, though nightmares of that cellar sometimes woke her screaming. Free, and that's what matters. The forest closed around Harriet like the arms of protective ancestors, pine branches whipping in residual winds from the passing storm. Her bare feet found purchase on roots and rocks, moving with desperate speed through terrain that would have been treacherous even in daylight. But the visions guided her, showed her where to step, where to avoid sinkholes, where the creeks ran shallow enough to cross. Behind her, maybe 2 miles back now, she heard them. The bloodhounds baying their terrible song, the shouts of paddy rollers organizing the hunt, the thunder of horses being saddled for pursuit. They'd found Silas faster than she'd hoped. The alarm had been raised while the storm still raged, and now every white man in 3 counties would be looking for the runaway who'd killed an overseer. "Lord, hide me," Harriet prayed as she ran, her lungs burning, legs threatening to give out after 90 nights of near immobility. "Hide me in your mighty hand like you hid Moses in the cleft of the rock. Don't let these devils catch me now, not after everything." The ancestors ran beside her, their presence a comfort even in terror. "The creek, child," they urged. "Get to the creek and wade downstream. Water kills the scent, confuses the dogs. We've been teaching runaway slaves this trick since the first one ever fled." Harriet veered east, following the sound of rushing water. The creek, swollen from storm runoff, crashed through the forest like liquid fury. She plunged in without hesitation, gasping as cold water hit her waist. The current was strong, trying to sweep her downstream, but she fought it, moving carefully over slippery stones, putting distance between herself and the plantation. The dog's baying grew fainter. She was buying time, but not much. Paddy rollers knew all the tricks too, knew about water trails, about doubling back, about every strategy desperate runaways employed. They'd split up, cover both banks, wait her out. "There," her grandmother's spirit said, "that hollow cypress tree on the north bank. Hide there till nightfall proper. Rest. Gather strength." You can't outrun them in your condition. You got to outsmart them. Harriet pulled herself from the creek, shivering violently now, her body finally registering what it had endured. She crawled into the hollow tree, a massive ancient cypress with a cavity large enough to conceal a grown woman. Inside was dry, filled with old leaves and the must of centuries. She curled into a ball, trying to still her ragged breathing, trying to become invisible. Footsteps approached. Horses splashing through the creek, men's voices calling to each other in the darkness. Lost the trail at the water. Dogs can't pick up nothing with all this rain. Split up. Jenkins, you take the north bank. William south. She couldn't have gone far, weak as she must be. They passed within yards of her hiding place. Harriet pressed deeper into the tree, one hand over her mouth to muffle any sound, the other clutching the small knife someone had pressed into her palm back at the quarters. If they found her, she'd fight. Rather die fighting than go back to chains. Rather bleed out in this forest than face what they'd do to a slave who killed a white man. But the ancestors wove confusion around the paddy rollers, made them look right past her tree, turned their eyes away like Moses turning Pharaoh's heart. The search party moved on, frustrated, their torches bobbing away into the darkness like malevolent fireflies. Harriet allowed herself to breathe, to rest. Her body was shutting down, demanding sleep after the extreme exertion. But sleep was dangerous, might not wake up, might miss her window of escape. She forced her eyes open, forced herself to stay alert. Hours passed. The false dawn came, that gray light before sunrise. Harriet knew she had to move again before full daylight exposed her. The visions showed her the next step, a swamp 3 miles north where the paddy rollers wouldn't follow, where the ground was treacherous and snakes nested thick. Dangerous for everyone, but runaways learned to navigate danger. Had to. She emerged from the hollow tree, body screaming protest. Every muscle ached. The wounds on her wrists and ankles where the shackles had rubbed raw were infected, seeping. She needed medicine, needed rest, needed safety. But first she needed distance. The swamp loomed ahead, a place of Spanish moss hanging like widow's weeds, of water dark as sin, of cypress knees rising like the bones of drowned giants. Harriet waded in, the mud sucking at her feet, leeches finding her skin. She moved slowly now, conserving strength, following the ancestors' guidance through channels and around sinkholes that could swallow a person whole. By mid-morning, she'd reached the swamp's far side, found a hammock of dry ground covered in palmetto fronds, collapsed there, unable to go another step. Her vision swam. Fever was setting in from the infected wounds, from exhaustion, from the trauma her body had endured. Rest now, the ancestors whispered. We'll stand guard. We'll watch for danger. Rest, Moses. You got a long road ahead and you need strength for what's coming. Harriet's eyes closed. She surrendered to sleep's dark pull, trusting the dead to protect the living. Behind her, the paddy rollers had given up the immediate chase, returned to the plantation to regroup. But the bounty on her head was spreading. Notices posted in every town, descriptions circulated, rewards offered. The hunt for Harriet Ross, the woman who drowned an overseer and escaped his chains, had only just begun. But so had her legend, and legends once born are harder to kill than flesh and blood. Harriet woke to gentle hands shaking her shoulder, and a woman's voice speaking urgent but kind. Sister, wake up now, wake up gentle. You safe, but you can't stay here. Her eyes opened to see a Quaker woman. Plain dress, white bonnet, face lined with compassion and determination. Behind her stood a black man, older with knowing eyes that had seen suffering and survived it. I'm Sarah, the woman said. This is Thomas. We're with the Underground Railroad. The ancestors sent us. Or rather, our network did. Word travels fast when someone strikes back like you did. Now come, we got a wagon hidden nearby. Got to move you before daylight full arrives. Harriet tried to stand, but her legs buckled. Thomas caught her with strong arms. Easy, sister. You've been through hell and back. Let us carry this load a while. They half carried her through the remaining swamp to where a wagon waited, hay piled high in the back with a false bottom beneath. Standard station wagon, Thomas explained, helping her into the hidden compartment. If paddy rollers stop us, they check the hay, find nothing, wave us on. You just stay quiet and still no matter what you hear. The compartment was cramped, dark, coffin-like. For a moment, panic seized Harriet. Felt too much like the cellar, like chains, like captivity. But Sarah squeezed her hand before closing the false bottom. This darkness leads to light. Keep faith. The wagon rolled north, every bump and jolt sending fresh agony through Harriet's battered body. But she endured. Had survived 90 nights in hell, could survive a few hours in a wagon. Above, she heard Thomas and Sarah talking casual-like, playing their roles as innocent travelers. Twice, they were stopped by patrols asking about runaways. Both times, Harriet held her breath, pressed her hand over her mouth to stop any sound. Both times, the searchers poked at the hay with rifles, found nothing, moved on frustrated. Hours later, the wagon stopped at a farmhouse outside a small town. The false bottom opened and blessed daylight, gentle golden afternoon sun flooded in. "Station house," Sarah said. "Safe place. Come inside. Let me tend those wounds before they turn septic and kill you." Inside, a table was already laid with real food: cornbread, salt pork, greens, milk. Harriet wept at the sight. 90 days of scraps and starvation made this simple meal look like a feast fit for kings. She ate slowly, fighting the urge to gorge, while Sarah cleaned and bandaged her wounds with practiced efficiency. "You the one they calling Harriet of the Chains," Sarah said. Statement, not question. Words spreading like wildfire through the network. They saying you drowned an overseer with the very chains meant to bind you. That true? "It's true," Harriet said quietly. "He was evil. He was breaking people, violating women, selling children. I did what needed doing." "No judgment here," Sarah replied. "Lord knows that man had blood on his hands. You just balanced the scales. But child, you gotta understand, this makes you marked. Every slave catcher in Maryland gonna be hunting you special. Bounty on your head is $300 now. That's more money than most folks see in a lifetime." "I know the danger," Harriet said. "But I can't just run and hide. I got people back there, my sister, my family, my community. I promised I'd come back for them. Promised I'd be Moses, leading folks to freedom." Thomas, who'd been listening quiet, spoke up. "Moses, eh? That's a powerful name to carry. But I see it in you. That calling, that fire. You've been baptized in suffering, emerged from death itself. You got the mark of someone touched by divine purpose." Over the next week, they moved Harriet through the network, safe house to safe house, hiding in barns and cellars and attics. Always one step ahead of the hunters. Each station keeper taught her something new: how to read the signs marking safe houses, how to navigate by stars and moss, how to distinguish genuine helpers from slave catchers posing as friends. She met other conductors, men and women, black and white, who dedicated their lives to this dangerous work. They shared stories of successful rescues and heartbreaking failures, of close calls and tragic captures. They showed her the routes, the hiding spots, the passwords and signals that kept the railroad running. "Most conductors make one, maybe two trips," an old conductor named William told her. "Too dangerous to keep going back. But something tells me you different. Something tells me you gonna make this your life's work." "I am," Harriet confirmed. "Until every last person wants to be free is free. Until slavery itself dies, and the auction blocks crumble to dust." Finally, after 3 weeks of careful travel, they reached Pennsylvania, crossed that freedom line on a morning bright with promise. Harriet stood on northern soil and felt something shift in her soul. Not just relief, but transformation. She was no longer just a runaway. She was a survivor, a warrior, a liberator. But she couldn't celebrate. Not yet. Not while her people still suffered south of that line. The Fugitive Slave Act meant she wasn't truly safe even here. Bounty hunters could cross state lines, could kidnap free blacks and claim they were runaways. Safety was an illusion. Freedom was always conditional. "I need to go back," she told Thomas and Sarah at the final station house in Philadelphia. "Need to learn the routes perfect, then return for my sister like I promised. That's suicide, Sarah protested. You just escaped with your life. You go back, they catch you. They'll make an example of you so terrible it'll haunt folks for generations. Then I better not get caught, Harriet replied, her voice carrying the steel that had been forged in that cellar, tempered in those chains. I've been dead already, been in the grave for 90 nights. Can't kill what's already died and been resurrected. Can't break what's already been broken and remade stronger. Thomas studied her long and hard, then nodded slow. You really are Moses, stubborn as that prophet called just as clear. All right then, let me teach you everything I know. Let me show you how to move ghosts through the South, how to lead people to freedom without leaving trails. But understand this, you gonna see things that break your heart. Gonna lose people you tried to save. Gonna carry weight that crushes most folks. I'm already carrying that weight, Harriet said, touching the scars on her wrists where the shackles had been. Been carrying it since the day I was born into bondage. Might as well put it to good use. And so began her training, her transformation from survivor to conductor, from victim to liberator, from Harriet Ross to Moses, the woman who would make 19 trips into slave territory, the legend who would never lose a passenger, the warrior who would turn personal suffering into collective liberation. 6 months after her escape, Harriet returned to Maryland. Winter had settled hard over the land, making travel miserable but also making the paddy rollers less vigilant. Who'd expect runaways to flee in December cold? But that's exactly what made it perfect timing. She moved like a ghost through territory that wanted her dead, her face covered, her manner changed, walking with a slight limp she'd cultivated to disguise her gait. The bounty notices still circulated. $300 for Harriet Ross, murderer of an overseer, extremely dangerous. But the woman they described didn't match the figure moving through the darkness. She'd learned to become invisible in plain sight. Her first mission was Rachel, her sister, the promise she'd made on that storm-torn night of her escape. Thomas had taught her well, how to make contact through the slave network, how to set up meeting times using spirituals sung at specific hours, how to move groups quietly through hostile territory. The meeting spot was a hush harbor deep in the woods, 3 miles from Thorne's plantation. Harriet waited there, heart pounding, wondering if Rachel would come, if the message had reached her, if it was a trap. Then, footsteps. Careful, quiet footsteps. And Rachel emerged from the darkness, older now, hardened by months of survival, but still her baby sister. They embraced without words, tears flowing silent. Then Rachel whispered, I brought others, 3 more who want freedom. That all right? More than all right, Harriet replied. That's perfect. The more we move, the harder we hit this evil system. The group consisted of Rachel, 2 field hands named James and Samuel, and a young mother named Mary carrying her infant son. 5 souls total, counting the baby. Harriet looked at them, saw their fear, their hope, their desperate courage, and felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like those chains she'd worn. Listen close, she said, her voice carrying authority earned through suffering. This gonna be the hardest thing you ever done. 90 miles to Pennsylvania. We travel by night, hide by day. You do exactly what I say when I say it. Anyone tries to turn back, I got a pistol and I ain't afraid to use it. Rather shoot you myself than let you go back and betray this whole operation. We all go free, or we all die trying. Understood? They nodded, eyes wide but determined. They'd heard the stories about Moses, about the woman who'd killed an overseer, about the conductor who never lost a passenger, about the legend who moved through the South like divine retribution. The journey was brutal. The first night, they made only 5 miles before having to hide in a tobacco barn. The baby cried, soft whimpers that sounded loud as thunder in the dangerous quiet. Mary tried to soothe him, panic rising, knowing that sound could doom them all. Harriet took the child, put a drop of paregoric on his tongue, just enough to make him drowsy but not harm him. Necessary evil, she whispered to Mary. Your son's life worth more than his comfort tonight. The second night they crossed a river so cold it felt like knives cutting flesh. James nearly didn't make it. The current swept him downstream, and only Samuel's quick grab saved him from drowning. They pulled him shivering to the far bank, and Harriet forced them to keep moving despite his protests. "Stop now, you die of cold. Move, and the blood keeps flowing. Keeps you warm." On the third night, they encountered patty rollers, heard the dogs before seeing the men, had just enough warning to hide in a drainage ditch filled with freezing mud. The search party passed within feet, dogs sniffing, men cursing the cold. Harriet's hand was on her pistol the whole time, ready to fight if necessary. But the ancestors seemed to blind the searchers. They looked right past the ditch, never saw the desperate souls hiding there. After the patty rollers moved on, Samuel started weeping, great heaving sobs of relief and terror. Harriet grabbed his face, made him look at her. "You cry now. You die later. Save the tears for freedom. Right now we move." They traveled through a network of safe houses Harriet had memorized. Quaker farms where haylofts concealed them by day. Free black communities that offered food and shelter. Church basements with hidden rooms. Each station keeper risked everything to help, and Harriet made sure her passengers understood that sacrifice. "These folks putting their lives on the line for us," she told them at one station. "White man helping slaves escape can be imprisoned, lose everything he owns. Black folk helping can be sold south, beaten, killed. Every bite of food you eat, every blanket that warms you, somebody risking death to provide it. Remember that. Honor that." On the seventh night, Samuel started talking about going back. The journey was too hard, too cold, too dangerous. He missed his woman back on the plantation, wanted to return and take his chances with life he knew. Harriet pulled her pistol and pressed it to his head. "You go back. You betray all of us. Give descriptions, reveal routes, get good people killed. I told you at the start, we all go free or we all die. You ready to die, Samuel? 'Cause I'm ready to pull this trigger." His eyes went wide with terror. "You wouldn't." "I would," Harriet said, her voice cold as the December wind. "I drowned a man with my own chains. Shot a coward trying to betray the railroad. I will not let you endanger my sister, this mother, this baby. So you decide right now, freedom or death." Samuel chose freedom, and after that, nobody talked about turning back. 14 nights after leaving Maryland, they crossed into Pennsylvania, stood on free soil as the sun rose golden and glorious. Mary collapsed to her knees, kissing the ground, praising Jesus. James and Samuel embraced, laughing and crying at once. Rachel took Harriet's hands and whispered, "You did it. You kept your promise." But Harriet felt no triumph, only exhaustion and the immediate planning for the next trip. "This is just the start," she said. "We got hundreds more to rescue, thousands. Every person we leave behind is a weight on my soul." Over the next decade, she made 19 trips, led over 300 people to freedom, became the most wanted woman in the South, the bounty reaching $40,000, a fortune beyond imagining. But they never caught her. The ancestors protected her, the visions guided her, and her absolute refusal to break, to quit, to accept defeat made her legendary. Other conductors spoke of her with awe. "That woman is blessed by God himself," they'd say. "Anointed for this work. Nothing stops her, not weather, not patty rollers, not sickness. She's Moses indeed." But Harriet knew the truth. She wasn't blessed. She was forged. Forged in 90 nights of chains and darkness. Forged in the moment she drowned her oppressor. Forged in every dangerous mile of the Underground Railroad. She was Harriet of the Chains. And she would not rest until slavery itself lay drowned in the flood of freedom. Years rolled on like that great river Jordan the spirituals sang about, carrying Harriet through war and peace, through triumph and loss, through the long arc of history bending toward justice. When the Civil War finally came, that reckoning the ancestors had shown her in visions, Harriet served as scout, spy, and nurse for the Union Army. She led raids that freed over 700 enslaved souls in a single night. She became the first woman to lead an armed expedition in American warfare. She lived to see slavery abolished, lived to see the chains break across the entire South, lived to stand as a free woman in a country that had finally, bloodily, paid for the sin of bondage. The auction blocks crumbled, the whipping posts rotted. The plantation system collapsed under the weight of its own evil. But Harriet never forgot those 90 nights, never forgot the cellar's darkness, the chain's bite, the moment she wrapped iron around Silas Crow's throat and delivered justice with her own scarred hands. That suffering had forged her, that resistance had defined her, that vengeance had freed not just her body but her spirit. She became an old woman, face lined with the years, body bent by hard use but eyes still burning with that fire the chains couldn't extinguish. Young folks would come to hear her stories, would sit at her feet like disciples before a prophet. She'd tell them about the Middle Passage memories the ancestors shared, about the Underground Railroad's secret routes, about the night she drowned the devil who thought he could break her. "You survived 90 nights in chains," they'd ask in wonder. 90 nights, she'd confirm, showing the scars that never fully healed. "But child, understand something. Them chains was on my body, not my soul. They could torture my flesh, but they couldn't reach what mattered. The spirit that stays free if you guard it fierce enough." "And you killed the Overseer?" "I executed him," she'd correct. "There's a difference. That man had blood of hundreds on his hands. I just balanced the scales the only way I could. The ancestors watched, and they approved." She'd tell them about the 300 souls she guided to freedom, about the families reunited, about the children born free because their parents had the courage to run. She'd tell them about the war, about black soldiers fighting for their own liberation, about the day Lincoln signed the papers that made bondage illegal across the land. But most important, she'd tell them about resistance, about how every act of defiance, big or small, loud or quiet, chipped away at slavery's foundation, about how survival itself was victory, about how the oppressed always, eventually, rise up and break their chains. "The fight ain't over," she'd warn them. "Slavery's dead, but its ghost still walks. You gotta stay vigilant, gotta keep resisting, gotta remember what our people endured so you could be free." When Harriet finally died in 1913, an old woman surrounded by the community she'd spent her life serving, they said the ancestors came to carry her home, said she crossed over singing the same spiritual she'd sung in that cellar 90 nights of darkness. "Wade in the water, children, wade in the water, God's gonna trouble the water." Her funeral was attended by hundreds, black and white, young and old, people whose lives she'd touched across 7 decades of activism. They buried her with military honors, recognizing her service in the war. But the eulogy that mattered most came from an old woman who'd been one of the 300 she'd rescued. "She was Moses to us. She led us out of bondage. She showed us that chains could be broken, that overseers could be defeated, that freedom was worth any price. She survived what would have killed most folks, then turned that survival into liberation for hundreds. That's the legacy. That's what we got to remember and honor." And so the story of Harriet of the Chains passed into legend, passed into the collective memory of a people who'd survived the unsurvivable, who'd resisted the irresistible, who'd broken chains that were meant to be eternal. Her 90 nights became a parable of endurance. Her drowning of Silas Crow became a testament that the oppressed could strike back. Her 19 trips became proof that one person, armed with courage and vision, could change the world. The cellar where she'd been imprisoned was eventually torn down when the plantation house collapsed. But folks say, if you stand on that ground on stormy nights, you can still hear chains rattling, still hear a woman singing spirituals, still feel the presence of ancestors standing guard over sacred ground where resistance was born. Harriet's story echoed through generations, became the story told to children learning about strength, became the story whispered in moments of despair to remember that survival is possible, became the story that proved chains, no matter how heavy, no matter how cruelly designed, could never bind the human spirit. She was Harriet Ross, Harriet of the Chains, Moses, liberator, warrior, legend. And her voice still speaks to us across the years, calling us to resistance, to courage, to freedom. The ancestors testified. The chains were broken. The story lives eternal. Those who suffered, suffered. Those who resisted, left memory. And memory we guard here in the echoes from the quarters. This story is ended, but the struggle continues. May the ancestors watch over us all. May we never forget the price of freedom. May we honor those who wore chains by living free and fierce and unbroken. Amen. And let the people say, Amen.